Yeah, another lovely day in Ohio. Sun's shining. Don't get too excited though. Temperature's going down to 4 degrees tonight. It's cold. And I think, according to the weatherman, that's supposed to be the end of our frigid spell of weather. I sure hope so, because I am really tired of the cold. This deep freeze, I can do with temps in the 40s, 50s, but 4 degrees? Good grief. And then it's the deal about heating the house all the time, too. Burning wood, we've been going through a lot of wood, and I got to figure out where I'm going to get some more wood to make it through the rest of the winter here. We're rolling closer and closer to springtime, but we got a way to go. Anyway, was thinking today about, going for a ride, but some of the longer runs I've had and where I've stayed along the way. Always reminded of that Metallica song, "Wherever I may roam, where I lay my head is home." And, that was pretty true about when I was out on the bike, on the road, and traveling across the country. Back in those days, I didn't have GPS. Well, I don't on this one either. But I had a paper map. When I needed it, I could pull the map out, look at it, see which route that I was going to take, and go from there. And I never had a big itinerary laid out, some people, they go ahead and make reservations for each night and know exactly where they're going and how far they're going. With me, it was however far I could hold on to the handlebars in a day. Sometimes maybe 500 miles, but sometimes up to 800 miles in a day or more. And then what I would do is, when you're on the highway, a lot of times you'll see signs that say lodging, and it'll tell the different places. And if there was a campground or something, that's where I would head to. I'd prefer to go to a state park because the state parks were relatively cheap for an overnight stay. Somewhere in the area of $8, used to be anyway, where I could get a spot to park my motorcycle and set up a tent. They called it primitive camping area because all it is just a grassy area where you can put your tent. And there's no electric hookup or anything, and you got to walk to the outhouse. But that's fine when you're on the road. I slept in a tent most of the time. I carried a tent on my bike. I like to use this tent. It was a Eureka 4-man tent. Kind of like the typical pup tent, with the A-frame type thing. And the 4-man was a little bigger. Now, I don't know if you ever spent a lot of time sleeping in a tent, but when you're in the tent, depending on the weather conditions, the sides of the tent, even just from being in there and from your breathing and stuff, can build up condensation and you get a little wet. And when you got one of those really small, like 1-man tents or 2-man tents, all you got to do is brush your back up against the side of the tent and your back's all soaking wet. So I liked the 4-man tent because it was a little bigger, gave me some room to move around in there. Plenty of room to stash my gear inside the tent and still be able to have room to put out my sleeping bag. Now, I didn't like to sleep just on the ground. I had to have a little comfort. So I really liked using these Thermarest mattresses. And they roll up, like a bedroll. Don't take up a lot of space. You can get them in all different sizes, lengths, thicknesses. They're kind of a self-inflating foam mattress, though. You unscrew the little valve on the end and roll it out, and within about 10-15 minutes, the thing just kind of fills up. And if you want it a little more firm, you just blow a little more air in there, firm it up, get it just the way you want it. And it keeps you, somewhat off the ground and gives you some padding so you're not laying on rocks or roots or anything like that. So it was pretty comfortable for me. And then I had a little pillow thing that you could blow air into, and it's just big enough to put your head on. Had a little bit of foam in it, but it rolled up really small. I could fit it in the saddlebag easy enough. And that was pretty much my bedroll. I had a 20-degree sleeping bag that kept me pretty warm. In fact, too warm on summer days, but in colder weather, it was very comfortable. And that was my main place of rest, when I had to sleep. Now, not every time did I put the tent up. There were times when I couldn't find a campground. I couldn't even find a hotel or a motel, not within distance of where I was traveling. And, sometimes you get into those areas where it's a little more rural and there's like nothing there. So in that case, I would roll my bed right out here on the bike. I would keep my head up at this end, and it wasn't the most comfortable bed, but I could have my legs down here, my hips right here, and just kind of lay up on the gas tank and move around until I found enough comfortable position where I could actually catch some Z's and get some sleep. Of course, the weather had to be right, no rain or anything like that, but I did sleep like that a couple times. I didn't like just laying on the ground without a tent because I didn't know what was on the ground. Ants, spiders, snakes, wood ticks. I don't, some of the areas that I rode to were unfamiliar to me as to what kind of critters they have around there. So I preferred to be up off the ground a little bit. I didn't want to wake up in the morning covered with red ants or something like that. When I had a chance, well, I wouldn't say, I tried to avoid the hotels and the motels as much as I possibly could. They're just costly, and I'd rather sleep in my own bed than somebody else's, if you know what I mean. Nothing worse than going to a hotel and pulling the sheets back and going, what the heck is that? But there were times when that was the only option. I found an old seed bag hotel one time. There was no campgrounds. There was no place to really stay. And I thought, well, at least I can use a shower, and rinse some of the stink off me. So I'll go ahead and stay at this cheap motel. Well, I had to park my bike. It was one of those ones that just, have all the doors right there outside. You have to go to the office and pay for your room. And then they give you a key and you come back and you unlock your door. And the bike was parked right in front of the room, right there. And it was a really small room. It's a little single bed and a bath and a shower. So I was able to, get cleaned up a little bit. But the worst thing about it was some kind of a hookup place, if you know what I mean. There was a lot of traffic coming in and out of there for just being a little motel. And I was really worried about my bike. I had it locked up, but I could always hear voices out in the parking lot. And when I'd pull the curtain open, there was some seedy bunches out there hanging out. And I didn't care for that too much. And that's why I didn't like staying in hotels either, because you get to a hotel, you check in, you get on the elevator, you go up to the third floor or whatever, and your room's over on the other side. And your bike is just parked there in a parking lot all by itself with no way to see it unless you go all the way down to the lobby and walk out the front door to see if your bike's still there. So I tried to avoid that. I always wanted to be in a place where I could be with my bike, see my bike. That's my ride, when you're out in Timbuktu and there's nobody around that you're just kind of on your own. That becomes your bride. You depend on that bike to be there in the morning to get you to the next stop. So I tried to avoid those hotels best that I could. In fact, I don't ever remember staying at one. It was usually just the cheap motel that I would, if I even had to, and those were far and few between. So most of the time it was the tent, the Eureka tent that I slept in and got a good night's rest. Now, my Eureka tent had these little thin aluminum tent poles, and they came apart in sections, and they were kind of attached with like an elastic kind of rubber bandy thing. So you could take them apart, fold them all up, and when you went to put it together, everything just kind of was already in order, and it just kind of snapped together. And then you throw the tent up around the tent poles. So, and I mean, I think nowadays there's more modern tents that are probably a little more lightweight and easier to assemble. But this one was pretty good. And I was set up at a campground. I don't remember where it was, but we had a storm come up, and it was a bad storm. And you get out west, I mean, those storms are fierce. The wind is very intense. You know, here in Ohio, we have a lot of trees. We have a lot of woods all around. And that blocks a lot of the wind. But sometimes when you're out west there's not much to stop that wind. Well, it came in like a hurricane, and it knocked the one whole side of my tent down. Actually broke the aluminum, just kind of broke right in half, and the whole thing caved in on the one side. I was lucky that's all that happened, though. I was able to find a stick. It wasn't easy because there wasn't a lot around there to choose from. But I finally found a straight enough piece of stick that I was able to duct tape to the tent pole. Duct tape? I always carried not a full roll, but you just take like a popsicle stick and wind duct tape around it so you got just enough in case you get an emergency. And that was gold that day because I was able to wrap the duct tape around the stick and use it as a splint to get my tent back up again. Now, there was another time when I was a little further up north, and I was in an area where the mosquitoes were really, really bad. I had my tent set up, got a little campfire going, just enough to cook some hot dogs on or something. But the mosquitoes came in at dusk, and they were so thick, like you could just hear the air just like buzzing. And I put a sweatshirt on. I have a head net that it's like for no-see-ums or mosquitoes, and I had that over my head tucked into my shirt, but my hands were bare, and I couldn't even tend to the fire to cook my food without having like 20 mosquitoes on each hand, and they were just it was driving me nuts. And just that high-pitched, from those mosquitoes. I went in the tent as fast as I could, zipped the tent shut, and then using my flashlight, I just crushed all the mosquitoes that happened to sneak in there with me, and stayed in there until morning when they were gone. There you go. That was kind of a unexpected scene, but I was so glad to have a tent with a nice screen on it that kept the mosquitoes out, because, boy, they were bad that time. I always liked this Michael Lichter poster that I have here in the man cave. The guy's got a prosthetic leg that he took off so he could sleep, and he's just rolled up there in a quilt. Looks like one of those moving blankets, moving quilts or something he's rolled up in, and he's sleeping on the grass right next to his bike. And yeah, I've done that once or twice, and that's kind of fun too when you can do that. Well, that's my story for today. Wherever you lay your head, I guess you can call that home. Place to rest, and you gotta do that. You gotta refuel. You gotta stop and take those breaks, and it's nice to be able to do them in comfort where you can get at least a half a night's rest. But I'll tell you what, some of those rallies and stuff that I've been to, even when you go to Sturgis, good luck trying to get a night's rest, because the noise level, the thundering of Harleys is going to go on probably through most of the night. I found the only time it was really quiet was like maybe 5, 6 a.m. because everybody was finally passed out. And maybe you'd only hear one Harley in the distance. But anytime during the day and all the way through the evening into the wee hours of the morning, all you'll hear is the thunder of Harleys. And some of the times I'd be there in my tent trying to sleep, and I'd actually see headlights like coming through the tent, and the sound, it looked like they were going to run right over my tent. And I'd be like, oh, Lord, please don't let them run into me. You never know who's riding that thing. They might have had a few too many. Fortunately, that never happened, but I'm sure it has happened to somebody. But yeah, the noise level is so loud that good luck trying to get any rest there. Last time V and I went out there, we stayed in a motel, and at least we had could get a quiet night's rest. It was quite a ways out of Sturgis too. It was all the way in the border of Wyoming that we stayed, and then we would just ride into Sturgis every day and tour around from there. Well, that's the discussion for today. That's all I got. It's good to have you guys along. It's always fun to have company here in the man cave. If you haven't been around before, welcome. I enjoyed having you join us today, and I hope to see more of you. In fact, I know you want to come back. Love to have you hang out with us. If that's the case, hit the subscribe button. I'd like to see you come back again and again. Well, that's it, cats. Until next time, ride hard, die free.